First,
Okay.
hola Rodrigo, Gustavo from Dry of the Force. Such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for this beautifully animated short. We really loved it.
Thank you.
My question has to do with culture and representation. Down in Star Wars Celebration in London, at the press conference, you had mentioned how Pablo Picasso and John Miro were like inspirations for like the art style. And looking at the short, also we saw like the lightsaber hilt designs were clearly inspired by traditional Spanish rapier hilt designs. So like my question has to do with all of that. Like how did all of these pieces come together for the short? How did they inspire the story? And like what other aspects of Spanish culture did you pull from to create this story?
So the way I approach the again, and thank you for the compliments for sure. I'm very curious about the the response on the short, but the way I approached this story was not so much from a cultural point of view, but almost like a personal. I felt like okay, I grew up in Spain, so just by thinking of stories and trying to make that something that can be universal or can be understood all around the world and be part of Star Wars, but in that will be culture will probably come out. What is great is again the team that I had was is the leadership is from Spain, right? So when we were getting these kind of references, they will pick it up very fast. I'm very fascinated. Our studio we just opened a couple of years ago for the short, and we actually are very close to the center of Madrid, where you can actually walk, almost like do a 5-minute walk and go from the Prado to the Reina Sofia, and you kind of see the history of art in front of your eyes in a walk, in a couple hours, right? You go from a very figurative, art form like Velázquez and Goya to a very, liberating Picasso, and just seeing that almost like, I was thinking, okay, I get a chance to do this. I have a blank canvas that is kind of what Lucasfilm offered in an amazing way, right? So I was like, okay, I'd love to connect part of that force through art to that kind of inspiration that happened, especially in the 20th century, and how we're very close, almost inspiration to Demoiselle d'Avignon, the famous Picasso painting, and how was one of the pioneers of abstract painting. So really, being able to graphically, pictorically push visuals and animation was again, and at the same time, be respectful of the mythology of Star Wars, but be bold, right? There was a lot of connection there. So that's really one of the sources of inspiration. And of course, in the way you're when you're thinking of an hangar where Lola lives, well, you're looking at the rooftops of some of the cities in the center of Spain. When you're looking at the hilt, you go through the history of Spain and swordmanship. So those are things that kind of started to come naturally into the narrative.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Charlotte from Sky Talkers. It's so great to talk with you today. I really enjoyed this short.
Thank you.
The droid E2 is such a great addition to the Star Wars droid family. How did his design come about?
So, I come from, my background is a character animator. So one of the first thing I wanted to really design when I got the call to make this short was, okay, you had that kind of bucket list of things you want to design. The droid came with this idea that usually, I kind of remember moments, right? And I always remember R2-D2, and when he was excited, he will do this kind of move where he just kind of almost jump, right? And it's so specific to make him emotional and actually transmit an emotion through that movement. So part of creating the design was like, okay, let's try to avoid rolling. So let's get him like this kind of spider-like little legs, so we can actually create very simple head tilts. I think the audience, part of the and this is the idea on the whole short, is like I wanted the audience to fill the gaps, to connect the dots themselves and not give them all the answers. Just have them in a journey of discovery. And the droid is we looked a lot at little dogs, almost like at puppies, and try to figure out these almost like, or also border collies. I always talk to the animators about, let's look at border collies and dogs that actually have this kind of shepherd feel, because the droid is there to kind of almost like protect. It feels like very specific about protecting Lola and like being aware of like watch out. So those creating that relationship through design, but also through movement was super important, right?
Talking Bay 94 is your turn right now.
Hi, Brandon from Talking Bay 94.
Yeah.
You mentioned filling in the gaps, and with these archetypal characters, it's very interesting to see them being placed in their story. Did you and your team discuss their backstories internally while you were building these characters, and how did that inform who they were on the screen?
That has been something that I've been thinking the last couple of years, even when I was writing the script, was this is almost like, and you've seen the short, like it's a moment in time, it's a culmination of a journey to two characters, right? Is a face-off, right? So for me, every line of dialogue, I wanted to imbue it with backstory, right? It's almost like everything there has to connect to a moment that these characters have lived through, because again, there is a dramatic learning experience in the way that I'm thinking about, the Sith order, right? And how rigorous that education needs to be. It actually mimics, and that's, I think, part of the appeal of the Star Wars mythology, that it mimics some of the, learning of history. And I think it was the way that it was connected and how we connect to it, because we see some similarities to kind of history, right? So part of that, was always thinking like, that must have been a dramatic escape or a dramatic breakup. So again, I started, your ramble, and you start, taking and thinking of unraveling and unwrapping the story, and that kind of like many of those choices in dialogue and moments come from that, from probably other encounters, and even from growing up, learning about the Sith and having to choose a different path, right?
Hi, Lacey from the Resistance Broadcast. It's an honor to speak to you. This was one of my favorite ones.
Oh, thank you.
It was really cool. So there's so many shots throughout the story that kind of just stick with you even after the episode's over. For me, it's the shot of the Sith Master dragging the lightsaber down the hallway. It's just so beautiful. Are there any moments or shots that are your favorites?
I have a very specific moment, and in animation, especially in CG, there's a great team behind it, and many hands touch a shot, right? So that's one. There's one that actually I was there trying to connect the camera. Is the shot where is a shot of realization of Lola, right? From when she realized that darkness is part of the picture. This camera that is on her looks down. The camera, kind of tilts down, and then we see kind of the force, kind of the dark force in a way, and her controlling it through the arm, and then seeing the darkness expanding on the floor, and then lifting those dark bubbles of of painting that we've seen before that she cannot control so much into like now fully realize. So we did a lot of back and forth. We changed the lighting from the beginning of her to afterwards to see that kind of resolution, enlightenment coming up. So moments like that are great. And I have one more, that is when the little droid discovers the little flower that is growing. It's one of these where like very, very specific, very a special moment when she, we kind of use the droid to actually change. Again, just witness, this kind of creation on painting, right?
Hi, Rodrigo. I'm Nikki from Octa Radio. First of all, I just want to echo everyone else and say, the short is amazing and speaks so beautifully to a lot of the great Star Wars themes. But I wanted to ask you, because I'm curious about some of your previous work, Troll Hunters originally began development, I think, as a feature film, and then eventually lived with great
Sure.
But I was wondering if you feel like Visions as a sort of project benefits artistically by being a series of shorts on a streaming platform, or do you feel like any of these, any episode from Volume 1, Volume 2 could be just as effective as a feature film? And then I guess by extension, like, what do you feel like is possible for Star Wars in an animated realm?
That's a great question. I think, again, I really love how Star Wars Vision came together, right? And what the Lucasfilm team is kind of doing with it, right? Is actually, making it a safe space in a way that let, creators bring this different point of view, a prism, almost like of what that Star Wars mythology that has been a long time with us, right? And how you can use that to bring different stories. I think that's, is part of the richness of the mythology and what it actually lets the creators do in a way, right? And write is part of what I think is again, it's very specific to that, right? I think, because and I can tell you about my journey, not about some other, and I'm very excited about the other creators and what are they creating with different mediums too, like, how also Visions is not narratively giving something new and actually creating that sandbox to play, but also actually experiment visually in animation, right? So I think that is not something that it's hard to see, right, in studios that, that have to really, kind of place a bet on an animation show. That's what is great, is like, you're getting this, excitement of, okay, let's use actually this, anthology just to push different boundaries, right? For me was, okay, in the way that I was thinking of Sith, it can live in a Star Wars world, right? I was thinking more prequels in a way, like far away, that kind of medieval time that they talk about. But I always thought, like, there's, that those kind of moments could be part of the source of this, right? Of this show, of these characters. But I want to think that way, right? I think, that's the way that probably someone else did more of a contained story. But again, that's what mythology, well thought out and visually simple mythology does. It lays the groundwork for you to create structure, like, the classic mythologies that we still create stories from, right? And in our world, right?
If it wasn't so visually striking, I probably wouldn't ask this question, but did the visuals inspire the story, or did the story inspire the visuals? Because the visuals and the way they're used just seem so important in the broader story of the short.
Sure. I think for me it was a whole, right? I wanted to create a piece that, you had that reaction. It's like, where does this come from? Mostly because I do like when all, and again, I love that kind of when that happened in cinema, is when everything clicks. Because, again, short film, TV, it's a medium that actually is almost like a unity of different approaches, different mediums, right? So I really like when everything is used and every frame is supercharged with all of those things, right? The inspiration for the short kind of came from a couple of places. One, a little longer and have a little bit more of a longer gestation. That was myself wanting to play with a blank canvas and trying to bring color and bring these kind of, these connecting the dots through painting and finding, strong color palettes that actually visually you can stop the frame and actually it feels like an illustration, but in motion it feels like animation. One of these things where you cannot quite grasp, how it was done. And then narratively, the character of Lola came from, I've told that story before, but the idea of una mirada is called in Spanish. That is, it's a hard one to translate. It's like, a look or a gaze, or it's something that, my daughter, it was a little small moment that could have been, imperceptible, but during the pandemic, she wanted to get out of the house with flip-flops one of the first time we're leaving, and I'm kind of the typical dad is like, no, we're gonna get shoes, and all these type of things that you've thought in your mind. And then my daughter looked at me with different eyes that I've seen her before, when she was 10. And I realized that moment, like, there was wisdom on that look. There was a, almost like defy, there was so many things in that look that is like, it kind of switched my point of view of like how I saw her at that moment. And I realized, wow, okay, this is actually a different thing of what I've been experiencing before about, shepherding, your daughter or whatever, how you want to educate, right? So that actually was, again, a very strong, visceral moment that I wanted to, make, Lola part of it. In the short, it has happened before the short, but it is, but it's still that kind of, wanted to defy that, and create her own path and, journey, is part of that story too, right?
Hey, this is Brian Young with Full of Sith. I wanted to ask about sort of the theme of the story. It makes a very strong statement, especially in a world where it seems like art is sort of valued less and less. You came out swinging with a really strong statement about how art is a path to finding the light in someone. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that and where that came from and why you felt Star Wars was the place to do that, because I haven't seen something like this before.
That probably comes from, again, I've been in the industry for a while, and I've been in development for a long time. So, you get trained to get rejected, right? That's actually what, if you want to make these kind of projects, you have to train yourself to be in that place. And you get a lot of comments, and there was one exec that told me very dismissively, it was like, oh, you want to do art a long time ago, right? And that kind of always stayed with me, and I realized, well, this maybe is the great opportunity because they give you a blank canvas, and maybe that's actually where you can actually connect both. But it's interesting, right? These days, we live in definitely challenging times because it's hard to value or to put a value on something, right? It's hard to understand what is the value of something, right? And I still believe, like, if it really hits your core emotionally, if there's a beauty to it, if there's, a craft that, a team has put into it, I really value those things, right? And I still think that is like, one of the highest values we can, bring to a medium like animation. So that's always been very simple in my approach, and I kind of like, this was the perfect opportunity to use, Star Wars visions and actually bring, again, a different point of view, but always aiming to create, visual value, visual protein, right, into it.
So a question I really had that was really interesting for me, looking not just at your short, but like all of the shorts of Visions, is the treatment of the Sith. Traditionally in Star Wars, like the Sith are viewed as a binary of evil versus the Jedi, which are good. But Visions, especially Season 2, Volume 2, has given us a more nuanced approach of like what the dark side is and what the Sith is. And this short is very emblematic of that, especially with how the use of color and art to show like Lola's journey. So can you expand on that a little bit, like what your views on the Sith and the dark side is in reference to the character's journey in this episode?
Yeah, I think, again, that's where the best, villains or dark side, not to just simplify it, but the best characters that come out of that kind of dark side is when they have these kind of dichotomies, right? These kind of, almost like there's ideas that you can connect to, but at the same time, that they are, they're not, done from the right place, right? For me, I call it like, more than shade of gray. In our short, we wanted to do shade of color, right? I don't think is a duality. There's one of the things that I like concept wise in terms of, you know, my life, and I tried to add it to the short, was this idea that you can live many lives in one life, right? And you can make choices that, you know, confront you and not easy, but actually they will put you in a place where like you'll discover other things and meet other cool people, right? And I think part of this is what Lola does in this short, right? Is actually she wanted to find, you know, a different, well, she made a choice, right? And a choice that has big consequences, right? Wherever you are, that, you know, that is a statement, and is, you know, a statement on her side of disobedience, right? And trying to, you know, move away from that Sith order, right? So I think, again, the audiences are becoming way more aware of these things. They actually are looking to understand that, because I do think we're going into a world where we're going to need to have these tools to understand what's coming, because it's like, you know, it's very, you know, these kind of, you know, choices or what is good, evil are very blurred these days, and actually we need to get into nuanced storytelling to understand, again, what is valuable, what is, like, you know, what is that journey that you have to, and the choices you have to make. Okay.
Hi, thanks so much. I have a question about why, how do you think Lola's story continues after the short, and if you have an inkling about where it heads?
Ooh, that's hard, because I only think a backstory. So I, you know, but again, as a statement, and this is probably a spoiler right after, but it's this idea that, again, she was able to change the small home where she lived, right? And make it look, or make it, you know, a place that is kind of very gritty, and this hospital, like you can actually, you know, very rugged place into almost like a nice cocoon. And then at the end of the short, she actually is able to change almost planets, right? So again, that is kind of a big statement. It's hard to think farther down the line, but I like to this line that she says, like, you know, a more welcoming home, right? I think that is what, I think, you know, it's part of what you have to find in life, right? It's like, you know, just, hey, if you're not liked in a place, maybe it's time to find a more welcoming place, and you know, someone that, I think, you know, it's kind of connected to the making of the short too, like, you know, coming to Spain, to Madrid, creating El Guiri Studios, and to make this short, you know, I've kind of, you know, had a good team that I worked before, but there was another new talent and skills that actually came with those new people that actually really gave something special to this. So it's a great, you know, that's what is a great journey. And I always think of the experiences of these projects as, you know, not only the project in itself and when it comes out, but the experience that you go through making it, because you meet pretty interesting and amazing artists on the path, right?
Okay, I just wanted to specifically ask you about, to cover again sort of the Sith Master's hilt, because I think it was really influenced by El Cid's Sedona, I think. I was just wondering where the design process decided to go there, and why specifically that sword.
So there's actually a lot of like inspiration to those designs. I wanted to, again, there's a big history of sword making in Spain, right? And I wanted to, and again, there, you know, I wanted to connect that to, I think, how Star Wars movie are crafts, and Star Wars in general. You know, the artistry that is behind it, and is very nuanced, it's very delicate. Like, you know, everything is designed in a way that is, you know, functional, but at the same time there's a beauty to it. It feels used. So, you know, I wanted to imbue that design with history in Sith, right? And the two things that are, you know, the hilts are, you know, different almost styles of swordmanship, right? It's like, you know, one is more medieval, swashbuckle, right? That's kind of the master, and that's actually the medieval, you know, tizona, right? The sword of El Cid. And then there's another one that was more of a rapier feel. But again, instead of like making a repeat, I wanted to, you know, imbue it with influences of what, again, George Lucas, probably some of the influences of the movies that are, you know, Kurosawa movies and samurai movies, right? And that katana. So there's, you know, there's different places I wanted to, you know, it felt like right visually, but yeah, those hilts were, you know, very specific at how, where those come from. So
Thank you very much.
thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.